Hello and welcome to the OTB channel. Today I'm going to be looking at Qtile, a really great window manager that you should try if you've been playing around with tiling window managers like me. See you after the intro. Okay, welcome back. You can see I'm back in the cabin and I've actually brought my camera down this week, so we're not using the C920 and I'm still playing around with the lighting, but we're getting there. Anyway, on to today's subject. You know that I've probably spent, I don't know, about the last 9 months trying different window managers. I actually started looking at window managers before I made videos about any of them. I'd been watching DT, as I think most of us do, and I'd seen him messing about with Qtile and Xmonad, and I gave them both a go, and my first attempt was a complete failure. I just couldn't get them configured. And I put them aside for a while, but then I moved on to look at i3, and I got something configured that I was quite happy with. I then looked at Awesome briefly, then on to Spectre WM, never quite sure how to pronounce that. And I was really impressed with that, and I stayed on Spectrum for a while. Oh, and BSPWM, really enjoyed that. To such an extent that after 2 or 3 months of using tiling window managers, I didn't want to go back to a full desktop environment. But I sort of shied away from Xmonad and Qtile because I really struggled with the config files. Anyway, I eventually got Xmonad configured thanks to DT's config file and a few minor tweaks that I did on it to get everything working. And I love the window manager. I think Xmonad's great. But the code, to me, just... Haskell is just beyond my capacity to even follow the logic. As you know, I can normally follow a script and figure out what's going on, but Haskell just, it's a black spot for me. And I was never really happy with the fact that I really didn't understand what was going on under the surface in the configuration file for Xmonad. So I moved on, as you know, to DWM, which many people see as, more difficult to configure because you've got to compile everything. But actually the config file, config.h, I know it's part of the source code, but config.h is actually pretty easy to configure. And the hardest part about DWM isn't that hard, it's the patching, and that's just time consuming. But once it's done, it's done. So, I actually stayed on DWM for quite a long time. I had a little play with Herb's Luft WM. It was okay. I think I'm definitely coming down on the side of dynamic tilers rather than manual tilers. But essentially I went back to DWM. Anyway, 2 weeks ago I thought to myself that there's just one window manager really that I haven't managed to crack yet, and it's Qtile. And I remember saying something on a video a long time ago that I know that the likes of DT says it's in Python, written in Python, so most people can follow along. It's dead easy to configure. Well, whatever it was, I just couldn't get it working properly. So I thought, I've avoided it, if I'm honest. I've avoided it for months and months and months. And I thought, no, come on, you've got to get this cracked. So I had a little bit of a play a couple of weeks ago. And strangely enough, I found it actually quite easy to configure. I don't know if this is simply because I've spent 9 months playing with different configuration files and messing about doing some basic bash scripting, and I'm just starting to get the logic of it. But suddenly I could see what the config file was doing, and it made sense to me. I don't know where it came from. I don't understand Python, but I could follow the logic. So I downloaded DT's config. I downloaded the Arco Linux Qtile config, and about another 3 or 4 from all over GitHub and GitLab. And I started putting something together. And I'm actually stunned with the results. It's essentially the way that it handles workspaces, or groups as it calls them, is very like Xmonad and very like Spectre WM. The same sort of thing. You have a set number of workspaces and they're not allocated per screen. If you have 8 workspaces, you can only be on 1 workspace per screen, but for instance, you'd be on your first screen, workspace 1, on your second screen, workspace 2, on your third screen, workspace 3. And you can switch workspaces, but if I switched on my main screen to workspace 2, it would immediately bring over whatever I'd been showing on that. So it's a slightly different way of working to DWM, where you have independent workspaces for each screen. So 8 workspaces for screen 1, 8 workspaces for screen 2, etc., etc. It's not a big issue. You can cope with either. I don't really have a huge preference. I think DWM, up until this point, is probably my favourite tiling window manager. But over the last couple of weeks, I'm really becoming a fan of Qtile. So let's go and have a look at what you get when you first install it. So you should see on your screen now my virtual machine of Endeavour OS. It's a dead giveaway with the default wallpaper. And all I've done is I've done sudo pacman -s Qtile. I've created a Qtile directory in my .config, say that again, my .config directory. And I've pulled down a default configuration file from usr share doc Qtile default config, and I've put it into my Qtile directory, and this is what you get. So that's basically all you get from the simple Qtile installation. And although I pulled down the default config, to be honest, I wouldn't even bother, because if you don't pull it down, it uses that anyway. And I can't really see anybody working just with the default configuration. I don't know what the key bindings are, and they're not that many, to be honest. It's a pretty basic setup. It'll get you going. It's got a bottom bar. You can open a terminal. You'll have perhaps a couple of layouts there, and that's about your lot. What most people will do is they'll play around pulling down config files from different people. Don't try and reinvent the wheel unless you're a Pythonista. Have a look at what other people have got, pull them down, and then put something together yourself. Make it your own. That's what I did, and let me show you now what I've ended up with. So you should see now on your screen my Qtile. Yes, for those of you who've seen my DWM, it looks very similar, and there's a reason for that. I like how I've configured my DWM, so I've tried to configure Qtile in exactly the same way. What you'll see is up here on the top left, I've got 8 groups, or workspaces, if you like. I've got a little thing there that kind of allows me to flick through different layouts. They're awesome icons. Then over on the right, I've got various widgets. Some of these widgets are already built into Qtile and you just have to set them up in your configuration file. Others are a couple of the scripts that I'm using with DWM. I couldn't find a widget that did everything that I wanted. So standard thing is you hit super and enter, and there's a terminal. I'm using Alacrity as my default. And if I keep opening up terminals, you'll see that it's coming up the standard master and stack layout, which it calls monad tall. If I do super and space, I can switch between different layouts. I've got a few here. I've got the max layout, and of course you can flick between skip screens here. I've got the monad tall, which we've just looked at, the monad wide, which has the master and stack horizontally. And I've got stack, where you get 2 columns, and as you open each new terminal or window, the new windows stack on top of these 2 columns. And of course we've got floating. I personally like monad tall. That's what I tend to stick with. And of course you can do whatever you want here. Let me just differentiate between the different terminals, put a few things in them. Let's put htop in one, and I don't know, LA. There we go. So different things in all my terminals. If I want to do a quick shift round and move the master over to the right, well, that's easy. I just do super shift F and we change round. I can move focus very easily from window to window. Not a problem. And I can move the windows around by super shift and the Vim keys. Or if I don't want the Vim keys, I can just use the right and left keys. And that's essentially the way it works. And I'm using super W to kill windows. You can obviously move to different workspaces. So let me just open up a terminal here and just do this again, or LA. There we go. If I wanted to move that to say workspace 4, I would do mod control 4. We can't say anything now because I'm still on screen number 2. But if I move over to number 4, you'll see it's there. If I now wanted to move that to, I don't know, workspace 8, and I wanted to follow along, I do mod shift 8. And there I am. I'm at number 8. You can see that I've got a few things there. There's at number 7. There's at number 8. There's at number 5. Maybe we should go back to 5. Mod shift 5. There we are. So I can move windows. And I can follow along. And what I can also do is I can actually move windows from screen to screen. Let me show you how this works. On the left-hand side, I have my lappy, which I've just put there. And then on the right-hand side, I have my other screen, a 1680 by 1050 screen. So with that set up, let's open a terminal, for instance. There we go, and let me start something like htop. And if I wanted now to move that to my laptop screen, I've set up key bindings where I do super shift comma to move over to the laptop screen, which is great. If I wanted to move it back to this screen, there we go. And if I wanted it to move it over to the screen on the far right, there we go. And I can move it back. So all good. I've also set up these widgets to do a range of things. Some of these, as I say, are built in, and others I'm using custom scripts. So this first one is built in, and it's a little icon that just lets me switch between different layouts. I've then got a picture of a pencil there. I'm using the Joy Pixels coloured emojis, and the great thing about all of these in Qtile is it's really easy to add mouse callbacks. So if I click on that pencil, that will open up Genie with the default configuration file, which I'll go through with you in a second. What have we got there? I've got my CPU with a callback there, GTop, so that's great. On the brain, which is meant to be the the memory, I've got HTOP. On the temperature, where are we going? Core temp. I can see the different temperatures of my cores. Yeah, don't forget, this is a laptop, and it's not a very powerful laptop, and I'm running OBS here, and goodness knows how many programs. It does run hot. This is about as hot as it runs, but it seems to be fine on that. So let's just shut that down. What else have we got? I've got a little X program that shows me basically the df command, which is great. Pulse mixer, if I click on the sound. What about on the tools? This is a custom script to show me how many updates I've got. If I click on that, I should, yeah, I'm going to get the Mac Manager coming up, so that's great. And if I click on the calendar there, I've got an N-curses program for the calendar. Great. To be honest, I've added these in because I wanted to show you what it's capable of. But to be honest, I'm probably not going to have many mouse callbacks there, with the exception possibly of being able to bring up Genie with my configuration file to start off with. So let's just see if we can make that a bit bigger. So this is the basic configuration file. And as I say, it was like a revelation. Suddenly I understood it, probably because I've spent so many months looking at different configuration files. We start off with a section where we import functions. We then create essentially variables. So the mod key is going to be mod 4, which is the Windows key. Mod 1 is going to be the Alt key. Mod 2 is going to be the Control key. I've defined my terminal as Alacrity. I saw DT did this and it seemed to make sense. And I've got this little section here, which means that I can actually use the tilde character and it will recognize home, Steve, or whatever. I've then got a number of different functions. Now, these allow you to do things within Qtile. And when I first started playing around with the configuration, one of the things that I couldn't do is what I've just shown you, moving windows from screen to screen. So I went on to the Qtile mail group. It's actually one of these Google mail groups, the Qtile dev group, and I raised a question. I said, is it possible to even move windows from screen to screen? And certainly within an hour, one of the guys there replied to me, and he pointed me to a configuration file on GitHub where some functions had been defined. These functions, in fact. And I simply pasted these in, and I followed along from his config file, and I was able to set up key bindings to get everything to swap back and forward. I've then sort of chopped up my key bindings into sections. So the first section, launch terminal, killer window, restart and exit. So I've got this all hooked up with the likes of Rofi. So you can see there, keymod X calls on a script called PowerSpec, and I'll show you what that is. It's just a menu to shut down, reboot, or suspend. I've then got all my D menu, Rofi, and GM run keys there. So the standard Rofi I use for my menu, I just call on that with super alt space. I've got a number of custom key bindings there to call on, well, particular things. So PavView control, for instance, if I go super alt P, that should bring up pulse audio volume control. There it is. I've got volume keys, brightness keys, because this is a laptop. Some keys for toggling layouts, changing window focus, switching the focus to different monitors, moving windows to different monitors, and then all the standard resize layout things. I mean, for instance, if I open up another terminal here, which you can see, all the resize controls allow me to, not only switch back and forwards like that, but they also allow me to make them bigger and smaller, etc., etc. So do just about everything with it. I've then defined my groups. I've got 8 groups, and I've subdivided them into names, labels, and layouts. I took this from the Arco Linux configuration, and it seems to work pretty well. Workspace navigation, so this is from moving to group. If I want to send a window to a different workspace, if I want to send a window to a different workspace and follow along, that's there. I've then defined my layouts. I'm using just these 5 different layouts, but actually you've got quite a selection that you can choose from. I've defined the colors that I'm going to use, and then I've got a list of widgets. Now, these are fairly straightforward to configure. If I perhaps open up a web browser here, you'll see what I mean. Right, so I've just opened up Firefox here. Let me just give it a little bit more space. There we go. And if we go to Qtile widgets, just do a search on that. I think the first one should take us there, the built-in widgets. Yes, it does. Here on the left, you have a list of different widgets, and basically what I've done is I've picked various things. So for instance, if we pick the memory one, if I go all the way down here and I pick memory, I select memory, all you have to actually enter is widget.memory from there. And then all your options that you can include are here. And you simply put in whatever you want, including the format. Now, it sounds complicated initially, but the more you look at other people's config files, and then you have a look at that default widgets page, you'll see how they use them. And I've literally just followed along. I've put in various things like the group box, which is all the groups here with the awesome icons. I've then got a separator, which is this vertical line. I've then got this current layout widget, which allows me to change everything, change the layouts. I've then got another separator. I've then got the window name, which is here. It tells me what window I've got open. Then I've got another separator. Then we move to the current layout icon. Then another separator. And as I said, I've used Joy Pixels, and I've just literally brought up my emoji, Rofi emoji, copied and pasted them in. And pretty much that's it. So it's all pretty straightforward. I like the way that DT actually defined his screens, so I've set up the config so you can have up to 3 screens on it. It doesn't matter if you run it on a machine that only has one screen, but at least you have the option. All of the screens on my setup are showing exactly the same widget sets, but you could actually create custom setups for each screen if you wanted to do that. Right, so what else do I do? So I've played around with the configuration file and I've got that working really well. But when you're running a window manager, no services are started out of the box. You have to have some sort of Autostart file so that you can start your pole kit, nitrogen, your compositor, etc., etc. And I've had terrible trouble with startup files in the past 6 or 7 months. What I've found is that often you can link a startup file to your main configuration file. But I had all sorts of problems with XR&R commands not starting up properly, compositing not starting up, and you have to play around with all sorts of weird and wonderful sleep commands to get things to work. So when I moved to DWM, what I started using, just for a little while, what are we looking at? I started using the .init rc file without a login manager. And I found that when I was just doing startx, it worked really well. Everything was starting up as I wanted it to. And I was just putting my XR&R command in at the top, my PyCon start, my nitrogen, etc., etc. And then, of course, the executable line there to start DWM. What I didn't really want to do, though, was to stick with startx. I much prefer using LightDM because I'm running all sorts of different window managers and it just makes things easier for me to use LightDM. So what I ended up doing was this. With LightDM, it keeps its desktop files in USR, if I can type, USR, share, X sessions, and in that directory. And if I do an ls, you'll see that there's a desktop file for all sorts of things that I've got here. BSPWM, DWM, HerbsLuftWM, i3, Mate, Qtile, Spectrum, Xmonad. So they're all there. What I've done, though, if I look at DWM, as I've just talked about that, if I look at the, we'll start that again, the DWM desktop file, you can see I haven't even changed the thing there. I've just copied these across. What I've actually changed the exec line there to do is rather than just running DWM, I think it's USR local bin DWM, I've actually pointed it in the direction of my .zinitrc file. And that seemed to really work well. Everything was starting up properly. So I thought, well, why not do exactly the same thing with Qtile and create another little file in my home directory. I've called it .qtstart and point LightDM towards it. So the first thing I did after installing Qtile was I edited the desktop file that the system had automatically put in USR share X sessions and pointed it towards this file called .qtstart. Okay. Let's just go back to my standard home directory. I then created .qtstart, and essentially what I did is I copied over the xinitrc file from DWM. I made a few bits and pieces of changes, basically putting the exec line there to USR bin Qtile and taking out the command to start the DWM bar. And it all worked really well. So now LightDM controls what I log into, but because I've modified the LightDM desktop files, they all point to startup scripts in my home directory, and they just start up that way. And what I've found is they're all starting up without a problem. I don't have to worry about sleep commands. Right, so you can see what I've been doing with Qtile. I've been with it a couple of weeks now, and I have to say I'm really impressed. I've got everything working. Everything seems to do what it needs to do. And despite it being Python, I haven't noticed that it's any slower or faster than any other window manager. It's got a feel like Xmonad to it, but I do sort of understand how it's configured. And I think I'm probably going to stick with it for a month or so and see what other functions I can find out there on GitHub and GitLab and have a real play. What I would say is, if you're like me and you quite like the way that Spectre WM or Xmonad works, but you're not very familiar with Haskell, well, it's worth giving this a try because it's easier to get along with. If you don't understand programming languages, as long as you can follow the logic of a script, you'll be fine. And there's plenty out there. I would recommend DT's config, which is up on GitLab, or the Arco Linux configs, which are up on GitHub, and you can just drop them straight into your Qtile directory, and you'll be up and running in no time, and then you can customize it and make it your own. So really good. I'm impressed with it. I think it's worth giving it a try. And I'm only sorry, really, that I left it so long. Now, some news. I am in the cabin, and I have this internet here in the cabin, and I've been threatening to do a live show for several months once I was set up. Well, I've been pushed in that direction by my Facebook group, and tomorrow, 3 p.m, I will be doing a live show. It's going to be a little bit of a pilot more than anything else. I've never done a live show, so I'm not overly sure how I go about doing it, so I've got a bit of homework to do. And we're going to look at the key question of, are there too many distros out there? So many distros, so little time. Is it worth doing all the hopping from distro to distro? Are we putting off new users because we've got so many? Does that even matter? Is the issue of choice, more important? We'll just have a general bit of a ramble and a chat with people who join. So if you're about at 3 o'clock tomorrow, hop on. I don't know how long it'll last for. I'm not planning to do hours and hours. I would say probably about an hour max. Bit nervous about it, to be honest. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it's been a bit of a ramble. I just wanted to show you where I've got to with this. And come and join me on Library. Come and join me on the Facebook group. And I'd like to move over to my Patreons and obviously thank them so much for the support so far. We've had a new Patreon join this week, Devon Caballero Zarate. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Devon, who's joined on the top tier. So he's my top-tiered patron there at the moment. Thanks very much, Devon. But also thanks to Cabinian, Robert, Gary, Aristotelis, Stormpix, Stephen, Mike Long, David, Entropy UK, Richard, Ty, Philip, Forrest, Scott, and Patrick. Thank you, guys. You're making this channel all it can be. And have a great weekend. But I hope to see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock, and we'll have a bit of a chat. Be kind. See you, guys.